She promised her father she'd be home in 5 months for the Rugby World Cup. She hugged him at the airport, laughed over pizza with her family, and talked about her dreams of becoming a model. 3 weeks after returning to England, 17-year-old Emily Longley was dead. Her boyfriend's mother made the call. Her voice was eerily calm. Too calm. And when police installed hidden listening devices inside the family's home, they discovered a cover-up that would shock an entire nation. This is the story of Emily Longley, a girl whose bright future was stolen by jealousy, control, and a family willing to lie to protect their son. Welcome to Final Verdict Files. Tonight, we're covering a case from England in 2011. It's the story of Emily Longley, a 17-year-old girl with big plans and a future she was excited about, until everything suddenly fell apart. The case drew massive attention, not just because she was so young, but because of the disturbing events that unfolded afterward. Events that would expose a web of manipulation, violence, and a shocking conspiracy to obstruct justice. Emily was born in England in 1994 to Mark and Caroline Longley. 2 years later, her sister Hannah was born, and the two of them grew up incredibly close. Their home was warm, supportive, and full of the usual family chaos in a good way. The kind of household where laughter echoed through the rooms and family dinners were a regular occurrence. When Emily was 9 and Hannah was 7, the family made a major decision. They packed up their lives and moved to Auckland, New Zealand. It was a fresh start, a chance to build something new on the other side of the world. And it became home pretty quickly. The girls adapted well. They made friends, settled into school, and embraced the outdoor lifestyle New Zealand offered. But as Emily got older, things started to shift. She began hanging out with people her parents didn't feel were good influences. Like many teenagers testing boundaries, Emily was drawn to a crowd that worried Mark and Caroline. They watched their daughter pulling away, making choices they weren't comfortable with. After many conversations and sleepless nights, they made a difficult decision. Wanting Emily to have a fresh start away from negative influences, they decided to send her back to the United Kingdom to live with her grandparents. It wasn't about punishment. It was about giving their daughter a chance to refocus on her future, her education, her dreams. In 2010, 16-year-old Emily flew to England to attend Brockenhurst College. She wanted to study business and dreamed of becoming a model. With her striking looks and natural confidence, it wasn't an unrealistic goal. She moved in with her grandparents in Bournemouth, a coastal town in Dorset, known for its 7 miles of golden beaches, its mild climate, and its holiday vibe. It's the kind of place where people go to relax, to retire, to enjoy life by the sea. For Emily, it represented opportunity and a chance to rebuild. Around that time, things were shifting back in New Zealand too. Hannah was still in school, navigating her teenage years, and their parents, Mark and Caroline, had recently divorced. But unlike many divorces that turn bitter and complicated, theirs remained civil. They stayed on good terms for the sake of their daughters, maintaining a united front even though their marriage had ended. Both girls knew they were loved by both parents, and that foundation of support never wavered. Emily settled into life in England quickly. She was outgoing, funny, and the kind of person who caught people's attention without really trying. She had that magnetic quality some people possess, where others are just naturally drawn to them. She made friends easily at college. She started building a social life, and she began to feel like Bournemouth could genuinely become home. Eventually, she met 20-year-old Elliot Turner. He made a strong first impression. He was confident, well-dressed, seemed to have money to spend, and moved through social circles with ease. He knew people. He threw his weight around in local bars and clubs. And before long, Emily and Elliot were officially dating. In April 2011, Emily flew back to New Zealand to visit her family. She hadn't seen them in about 6 months, and the distance had been hard on everyone. International moves always come with sacrifice, and for the Longley family, that sacrifice was time together. Her dad, Mark, met her at the airport, and as soon as Emily saw him, she ran over and hugged him hard, telling him how much she'd missed him. They had a close bond, the kind of father-daughter relationship built on mutual respect, shared humor, and genuine affection. He adored her sense of humor, her energy, the way she could light up a room, and all the little things you miss when someone's been away for months. The next day, the whole family went out to Emily's favorite pizzeria. It was one of those simple, perfect family moments. Over pizza, Emily told them about school, her modeling aspirations, and a new friend she'd made back in England. She talked about college life, the coastal town she now called home, and the adventures she'd been having. She also mentioned the guy she was dating, Elliot. They'd only been together a few months, and she told her parents she didn't see it as anything too serious yet. In fact, she made a comment that would later haunt her family. "I think I'm going to end it when I go back," she said casually, as if breaking up with a boyfriend was just another item on her to-do list. Emily spent the next few weeks in New Zealand hanging out with her friends and family. She reconnected with childhood friends she hadn't seen in months. She went to the beach. She caught up on all the gossip. She was relaxed, happy, and genuinely enjoying her time there. No one had any reason to think anything was wrong, or that they'd be losing her so soon. There were no red flags during this visit, no signs of trouble, no indication that darkness was waiting for her back in England. When it was time for her flight back to England, saying goodbye was tough. It always is when you don't know when you'll see someone again. The hugs lasted a little longer. The "I love yous" were said a few extra times. Still, Emily promised her family she'd be back in 5 months. She wanted to be home for the Rugby World Cup, which was starting on September 9th. It gave everyone something to look forward to. A date circled on the calendar. A reunion already planned. A few days after returning to England, while texting her dad, Emily told him she'd broken up with Elliot. She didn't explain much, didn't go into detail about what had happened or why. She just mentioned that it was over. For Mark, sitting thousands of miles away in New Zealand, it seemed like normal teenage relationship drama. Young people date, they break up, they move on. He didn't think much of it at the time. But Elliot Turner wasn't taking the breakup well. One thing that had particularly bothered him was the photos Emily had posted on social media while she was in New Zealand. Some of them included guys she was hanging out with, male friends from her past, people she'd grown up with. But to Elliot, these photos represented competition, threats, other men in Emily's life. And his jealousy kicked in hard. He couldn't stand the thought of Emily with anyone else, even platonically. His possessiveness had been building throughout their relationship, and now it was reaching dangerous levels. Let me tell you about Elliot Turner. He was 20 years old, the son of a wealthy jeweler named Lee Turner, and on the surface, he seemed to have an easy, comfortable life. He didn't work. He didn't have responsibilities. His parents paid for everything, funding a lifestyle of endless partying and self-indulgence. He was well known around the bars and clubs in Bournemouth and Poole, a regular fixture in the nightlife scene. He hung out with a group of wealthy young guys who called themselves the Firm, as if they were some kind of organized crew. It was all posturing, all image, all about looking important. His friends called him All Talk Turner because he bragged constantly. He talked big, made wild claims, and loved being the center of attention. He'd walk into a bar and announce his arrival. He'd buy drinks for strangers just to show he could, just to make people notice him. Everything was about maintaining an image of power and influence that didn't actually exist. He and Emily first met in December 2010. At first, things seemed fun. There were late nights, parties, and a lifestyle that felt exciting, especially for a teenage girl new to the area. Elliot knew how to be charming when he wanted to be. He knew how to make someone feel special, at least in the beginning. But Elliot had a history of getting obsessive in relationships, and the same dark patterns started to show up with Emily. Their arguments became intense very quickly, escalating from minor disagreements to volatile confrontations. People who knew him described him as aggressive, controlling, and easily set off. He had a short fuse and a need to dominate every situation. And this wasn't new behavior either. Back in January 2008, when he was just 16 years old, police had given him a harassment warning after he bombarded an ex-girlfriend with texts and emails when she broke up with him. Even as a teenager, he couldn't handle rejection. He couldn't accept that someone didn't want to be with him. So he harassed her relentlessly until authorities had to intervene. But that warning didn't change anything. Elliot loved being the center of attention. He didn't work, had never held a real job. His parents paid for everything, and he knew how to manipulate people, including them. His life revolved around partying, pursuing women, consuming alcohol, and using substances. He acted like he could do whatever he wanted without consequences, and for most of his life, he'd been right. Mommy and Daddy always cleaned up his messes. They always made problems disappear. He even carried a hammer around, supposedly for protection if someone challenged him. Think about that for a second. A 20-year-old guy from a wealthy family walking around Bournemouth with a hammer in case he got into a confrontation. It speaks to his mindset, his need to appear dangerous, his desire to intimidate. His friend said he liked to think of himself as a kind of wannabe gangster, the guy everyone went to for favors, the person who could make things happen. In reality, he was a spoiled rich kid playing dress-up, pretending to be something he wasn't. He'd walk into a bar and buy drinks for the whole place, just to make a point, just to assert dominance. He bragged about driving a new Mini Cooper, though it was actually a gift from his grandmother. Even his supposed symbols of success were handed to him by family members. Nothing was earned. Everything was given. Online, he kept up that tough guy image with posts full of fake street language, calling himself things like Scarface or even God. He created this persona of an untouchable figure, someone powerful and dangerous. But it was all fantasy, all compensation for deep insecurity and a complete lack of genuine identity. Elliot never struggled to get attention from women. He had money, he had looks, he had confidence, even if it was false confidence. But when he met Emily, he latched onto her quickly and intensely. She fit the image he wanted to project. She was beautiful, successful in her own right, confident, and someone who made him look good. In his mind, Emily was a trophy, a possession that elevated his status. As their relationship went on, his controlling behavior became harder to ignore. He wanted to know where she was at all times. He wanted to know who she was with. He checked her phone. He read her messages. He questioned her about every interaction with other people, especially men. And at one point, he even threatened to take her life. Let that sink in. He verbally threatened to end her life, and it wasn't just once. A few months before she died, Emily wrote him a note. It was emotional and straightforward, almost like she was trying to get through to him one last time, trying to make him understand how his behavior was affecting her. She wrote, 1. I love you. 2. Don't say you'll harm me. 3. Stop talking about your ex-girlfriends. 4. Stop being so aggressive all the time. Just relax. It's more attractive, and you scare me when you act so intimidating. Read that again. A 17-year-old girl had to write down in a numbered list that her boyfriend needed to stop threatening to harm her. She had to explicitly ask him not to talk about violence against her, and she admitted that she was scared of him. This note is a snapshot of the relationship, a glimpse into the fear and control Emily was living under. When Elliot's behavior kept getting worse and crossed every line of what she felt was normal or acceptable, Emily realized she couldn't stay with him. She couldn't keep pretending things would get better. She couldn't keep making excuses for his aggression. But people like Elliot Turner don't take rejection well. For someone who sees their partner as a possession, as property, breaking up isn't just the end of a relationship. It's a loss of control. And Elliot couldn't tolerate that loss. On the night of May 6th, 2011, Emily went out with friends. She wanted to have fun, to enjoy her youth, to be a normal teenager. Surveillance cameras showed her arriving at a nightclub with them, smiling, dressed up, ready for a good night. That same evening, Elliot had been reading her Facebook messages without her permission, violating her privacy as he often did. And he found out she was seeing someone else. She'd moved on. She was talking to another guy, and he was furious, absolutely enraged. He showed up at the club, uninvited, and picked a fight with her in front of everyone. Things escalated quickly. Emily threw her drink in his face, a public rejection, a moment of defiance. And he responded by yelling at her and threatening her in front of witnesses. He didn't like the outfit she was wearing and said it was too revealing, criticizing her appearance, trying to control even how she dressed. Even though Emily had ended the relationship, he refused to accept it. He ruined her night, creating a scene, embarrassing her in front of her friends. She decided to leave the club, wanting to get away from him, wanting the confrontation to end. But he followed her. He wasn't going to let her walk away. Friends who were there later told police they heard him say something chilling. "I will harm her. I'll go to prison for it and still be a millionaire. I'd do 10 years. It wouldn't bother me." Think about that statement. He verbally acknowledged that harming Emily would send him to prison. He calculated the potential sentence, 10 years, and he decided it was worth it. His wealth, his family's money, made him feel invincible. What's 10 years when you're still rich on the other side? His friends heard this. They heard him openly threaten Emily's life. And they did nothing. They assumed he was just talking big again, just being all talk Turner. No one took him seriously. No one called the police. No one warned Emily. And that failure to act would cost Emily her life. Elliot eventually caught up with Emily outside the club and persuaded her to go back to his house. He said they could talk somewhere quieter, somewhere private. Maybe he apologized. Maybe he promised to calm down. Maybe he manipulated her emotions, made her feel guilty for throwing the drink, for rejecting him publicly. He still lived with his parents in their family home, and maybe that made Emily feel it would be safer. She might have thought that with his parents there, he'd be on better behavior, that he'd calm down in front of them, that nothing serious could happen in a house with other adults present. Neighbors saw the two of them walk into the Turner family home together. It was the last time anyone would see Emily Longley alive. The next morning, around 9 o'clock, Elliot's mother, Anita Turner, called emergency services. She reported that Emily wasn't waking up. While waiting for the ambulance, Anita followed the operator's instructions over the phone, supposedly attempting to help Emily until paramedics could arrive. But by the time the ambulance got there, it was already too late. All they could do was pronounce 17-year-old Emily Longley deceased. The bright, funny, ambitious girl who'd hugged her father at the airport just weeks earlier was gone. The daughter who'd promised to be home in 5 months was never coming home. Let me tell you about Anita Turner, Elliot's mother. She was originally from Indonesia and had moved to the United Kingdom to marry Lee Turner. When they had their son, Elliot, they gave him everything he wanted. Every toy, every gadget, every experience, every indulgence. Looking back, as even they would later admit, it turned out to be a serious mistake. They created a monster, a young man who believed he was entitled to everything and accountable for nothing. When Anita called emergency services that morning, something fell off to the responding officers. Her voice didn't sound like someone who had just found her son's girlfriend unresponsive in their home. There was no panic, no hysteria, no urgency. She sounded strangely calm, almost detached, almost as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening. For experienced emergency dispatchers and paramedics, the tone of that call raised immediate red flags. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in New Zealand, Emily's father, Mark, woke up at around 2 o'clock in the morning. He saw several missed calls from his ex-wife Caroline and from their younger daughter Hannah. Something was wrong. You don't get multiple missed calls in the middle of the night unless something is seriously wrong. There was also a voice message from Hannah, but when he played it, he could barely understand what she was saying through the tears and the panic. Then he heard Caroline in the background screaming, "Emily is dead." Mark couldn't accept it. He immediately called his mother in England, hoping for clarification, hoping there'd been some mistake. When she answered, she was crying uncontrollably, barely able to speak. A moment later, a police officer took the phone from her and delivered the words no parent ever wants to hear. "I'm sorry to tell you that your daughter Emily has passed away." Just a week earlier, Emily had been sitting on his couch in New Zealand, smiling, laughing, eating pizza with the family, acting like her usual self. She'd been alive, vibrant, full of plans and dreams. Now he was being told she was gone. Just like that. Without warning. Without explanation. As he arranged emergency flights and made his way to the United Kingdom, he kept hoping it was all some kind of mix-up. Maybe it was a different Emily. Maybe there'd been a mistake with identification. Maybe his mother had misunderstood. But deep down he knew. And when he arrived, his worst fears were confirmed. It wasn't a mistake. Losing their oldest daughter was devastating for both of Emily's parents. The grief was incomprehensible, the kind of loss that breaks people. At first, The police told them she had passed in her sleep, suggesting it might have been natural causes, some undetected medical condition. But that explanation didn't sit right with anyone who knew Emily. She was young, healthy, athletic, and full of energy. She didn't have any known medical conditions. Healthy 17-year-olds don't just die in their sleep without reason. The police collected what evidence they could from the scene, but it still wasn't clear exactly what had happened. The circumstances were suspicious, but without a clear cause of death, they couldn't move forward with any specific investigation. Everyone had to wait for the autopsy results. Elliot and his parents, Anita and Lee, told investigators they had been home all night and hadn't heard anything unusual. They claimed Emily and Elliot had gone to his room. Everything had seemed fine, and then in the morning, she simply wouldn't wake up. Elliot even posted photos of himself and Emily on Facebook, acting publicly heartbroken, playing the role of the devastated boyfriend. He wrote emotional tributes. He changed his profile picture to one of them together. He engaged with condolences from friends. It was all performance, all manipulation. At that point, the police didn't have enough solid evidence to prove his story was false. They had suspicions, certainly. The circumstances were questionable. But suspicion isn't enough for an arrest. They needed evidence. In any unexplained case like this, the first and most important step is figuring out the cause. Once investigators know how someone passed, they can understand what direction the case should take. Was it natural causes? An accident? Something more sinister? The autopsy would provide crucial answers. While they waited for those results, detectives looked deeper into Emily's recent activity, examining her social media accounts, her phone records, her communications. And they discovered that a few days before she passed, she had posted something unusual and disturbing on her Facebook page. "I have a stalker," Emily wrote on Thursday, May 5th, just 2 days before her death. "Someone just called me, and I asked who it was. They said, 'You don't know me, but I know everything about you.' I asked how they got my number, and they said, 'I'll tell you when I see you,' and kept asking me out. So I hung up, but they won't stop calling." This post added another layer to the investigation. Was someone stalking Emily? Was this connected to her death? Or was this stalker actually Elliot himself, using a different phone to harass her after she'd broken up with him? The timing was suspicious, coming just days before her death. Around the same time, police learned that Emily had argued with Elliot Turner in front of other people at a nightclub shortly before she passed. Multiple witnesses came forward describing the confrontation. After interviewing Elliot's friends, investigators found out that he tried to control almost everything Emily did during their relationship. He dictated who she could see, where she could go, what she could wear, how she presented herself online. They also learned he knew she had been seeing another guy, that his jealousy had become explosive, and most importantly, that Elliot had threatened to harm Emily more than once. Multiple people had heard these threats. His friends brushed it off at the time, assuming he was just talking big to sound tough, being dramatic, playing up his gangster persona. After all, he was all talk, Turner. But talk had turned into action. When the autopsy came back, it didn't give a definitive clear cause of death initially, which sometimes happens in cases of asphyxiation. But the medical expert said the injuries and findings could be consistent with asphyxiation, potentially from pressure applied to the neck. One expert noted that the physical findings matched what you would expect if someone had been strangled, if their airway had been compressed, cutting off oxygen to the brain. There were subtle signs, markers that suggested this was not a natural death. Investigators began to suspect that someone in the Turner household might have been involved in Emily's death. The suspicious phone call from Anita, the calm demeanor, Elliot's history of violence and threats, the circumstances of Emily being at their house. It all pointed toward foul play within that home. So they made a decision. They installed listening devices inside the Turner home. This is a significant step in any investigation, requiring legal authorization and judicial approval. But given the circumstances and the suspicions, a judge granted the warrant. Investigators wanted to know if the family was hiding anything, if they were coordinating stories, if the truth would emerge when they thought no one was listening. And it turned out they were hiding everything. On the recordings, investigators heard Elliot coaching his mother on what to say to police and how she should act during questioning. They heard him instructing her on specific details, telling her what to remember and what to forget. His father, Lee, seemed to be the only one who realized this was fundamentally wrong, that they were obstructing justice, that they were helping their son cover up a crime. But even he eventually went along with what his wife and son wanted. Family loyalty won out over morality and law. And then, on those same recordings, investigators heard something even more important, something that would seal Elliot Turner's fate. They heard him admitting that he caused Emily's death. He didn't use those exact words in one single sentence, but over multiple recorded conversations, he made statements that collectively amounted to a confession. He talked about what happened that night. He discussed how angry he'd been. He admitted to actions that resulted in Emily's death. He was arrested 1 week after Emily passed. When police showed up, he denied everything, putting on a performance of shock and innocence. His lawyers immediately tried to challenge the recordings, arguing they weren't reliable, that they'd been taken out of context, that they should be inadmissible in court. But after reviewing all the details of the case, examining the recordings themselves, and considering the totality of evidence, the judge allowed the audio to be used as evidence at trial. Not realizing the police had been listening the whole time, Elliot had been brutally honest in his own home. He'd said that he was angry every single day. He'd said that no one had ever made him as furious as Emily did. He talked about her rejection, about her seeing someone else, about feeling disrespected and humiliated. In his mind, he was the victim. She'd wronged him by exercising her basic human right to end a relationship. During the trial in May 2012, nearly a year after Emily's death, his lawyer argued that he acted in self-defense. This is a common strategy in cases like this. Elliot claimed the argument in his bedroom got out of hand and that he grabbed Emily by the neck because he felt threatened by her. He insisted he didn't intentionally harm her and said he simply woke up the next morning and found her deceased in his bed. According to his version of events, it was all a tragic accident, a moment of panic, a defensive reaction gone wrong. On the second day of the trial, Turner told the court he was disgusted with himself for what happened that night. He expressed remorse, though whether it was genuine remorse for Emily's death or remorse for being caught is debatable. He claimed that after finding Emily deceased, he wrote a letter to his mother saying he was ashamed and planned to leave for Spain to run away from what he'd done. It looked as if he might have been preparing to flee the country on the very day Emily passed. When police arrived after the 999 call that morning, they noticed bags already packed in Elliot's room. His passport was even in his pocket. He was ready to run. Only his mother's phone call to emergency services, which was likely made to establish their cover story, prevented his immediate escape. In court, Elliot admitted he had threatened Emily previously. He admitted he'd been upset and felt tricked the night before her death. He said he'd seen emails on her phone that made it look like he had physically harmed her before, emails describing abuse. Emails that turned out to be fake, possibly created by Elliot himself to justify his anger, to paint Emily as someone who'd falsely accused him. When he described the argument that happened before Emily passed, he claimed she started hitting him with her hands and feet, that she became violent first. He said he tried to calm her down, tried to de-escalate the situation. Then, according to him, he eventually gave up and tossed her a 20-pound note for a cab, telling her to leave. According to his testimony, she just ignored me at first. Then 5 seconds later, she went crazy. I had never seen Emily that angry. I didn't know what to do. She wouldn't stop. I kept telling her, stop it. Calm down. He said that's when he grabbed her by the neck with his right hand. He described it as a restraint technique, a way to stop her aggression. The defense counsel, Anthony Dunn, asked him, "Why did you do that?" Turner replied, "To stop her going nuts. I didn't know what to do. My right hand made contact with her neck." When asked how hard he grabbed her, Turner said, "I wouldn't say very hard, but it was quite hard." Think about that phrasing. Not very hard, but quite hard. He's trying to minimize the force while simultaneously admitting significant pressure. He explained that he grabbed her, pushed her onto the bed, and pressed down on her neck while she was lying down, a position of complete dominance and control. According to him, He held her there for 5 or 6 seconds, then let go and walked out of the room, leaving her on the bed. 5 or 6 seconds doesn't sound like a long time. Count it out right now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But 5 to 6 seconds of pressure on someone's neck, cutting off their airway, can absolutely be fatal. It doesn't take long to cause unconsciousness or death through strangulation. And the idea that he then just walked out, leaving her there, shows a callous disregard for her well-being. When the defense asked if he meant to harm her fatally, Turner said no. He said he thought she had fallen asleep after he released her and that he didn't realize she was deceased until she didn't wake up the next morning. He wanted the jury to believe it was all an accident, that he'd simply restrained her and she'd somehow died without his intent. But the evidence told a different story. The autopsy findings, the threats he'd made previously, the pattern of controlling behavior, the way he and his family tried to cover everything up. All of it pointed to intentional violence, not an accident. In an interview with the Herald newspaper, Emily's father, Mark, talked about how difficult it was to lose his daughter. His words are heartbreaking and raw. Here's the thing about losing someone, he said. It's devastating. It doesn't matter if it's your child, your partner, or your 99-year-old grandmother. It's devastating. A person is here one day and gone the next, and it's not something you ever get used to. He talked about how every milestone became painful. Birthdays that Emily would never celebrate. Christmas mornings she'd never experience. Easter gatherings without her presence. He said Easter was especially hard because it was the last holiday he had really spent time with her. That final visit to New Zealand, that pizza dinner where she'd smiled and laughed and talked about her future. For him, the heaviest part was knowing he would never get to see the woman she would have grown up to be. He'd never walk her down the aisle. He'd never meet her children. He'd never see what career she'd build, what adventures she'd have, what impact she'd make on the world. I miss seeing the life she never got to live. We only got a small glimpse of the woman she was becoming, and I was so proud of her. Mark said, I'm her father, so of course I'm biased, but the world really was a better place with her in it. It was definitely a lot more fun. That last line captures something important. Emily wasn't just a victim in a case file. She was a real person who brought joy and light to the people around her. Her absence was felt by everyone who knew her. At the trial, Elliot Turner was portrayed by prosecutors as a spoiled, wealthy young man whose parents tried to shield him from any consequences throughout his entire life. The court heard that he had full run of the family's home in the upscale Queen's Park area of Bournemouth, where he regularly held parties for his middle-class friends. These weren't small gatherings. They were wild parties with dozens of people, loud music, abundant alcohol, and substances. His father, Lee, described these parties as wild and out of control. But rather than putting a stop to them, rather than establishing boundaries, they'd given Elliot his own living space in the converted garage. They'd essentially created a separate apartment for him with its own entrance, so he could come and go without bothering his parents, so they could maintain plausible deniability about his activities. It was in that room, with its own mini bar and the privacy he was used to, that he harmed Emily on his bed. That converted garage, that space of supposed independence, became a crime scene. When police examined computers from the Turner house during their investigation, they found search queries that were absolutely damning. Someone in that household had searched for terms like asphyxiation and how to avoid punishment for wrongdoing. These searches suggested premeditation, planning, or, at minimum, an awareness that a crime had been committed and a desire to evade consequences. Jealousy was identified as the main motive. Elliot couldn't stand that Emily had moved on, that she was seeing someone else, that she'd rejected him publicly. His fragile ego, his need for control, his possessiveness all combined into lethal rage. The court heard testimony from Luke Ashford, the man who had spent the night with Emily shortly before her death. He testified about their relationship, about Emily's state of mind, about her fears regarding Elliot. Elliot had found out about Luke, and it had sent him into a jealous spiral. Even while he was in custody awaiting trial, Elliot bragged to other inmates that the jury would believe his twisted version of events. He was convinced his self-defense story would work, that his family's money would buy him freedom, that his charm and manipulation would sway the jury. He claimed Emily had attacked him and that he'd only acted in self-defense, trying out his story on anyone who would listen. In letters he wrote from prison to his friends, letters that were later obtained by prosecutors, he claimed he'd soon be driving a new Range Rover and moving to Spain. He talked about selling the rights to his story and living a glamorous life, as if Emily's death was just a temporary inconvenience, a brief interruption in his entitled existence. He saw himself as the protagonist of some dramatic story, not as a man who'd taken an innocent life. But the jury saw through it all. They saw through his lies, his manipulation, his carefully constructed defense. And they ended those fantasies quickly when they returned a guilty verdict. On May 22, 2012, Elliot Turner was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 16 years before he could even be considered for parole. That means he couldn't apply for release until 2028 at the earliest. Announcing the verdict, Mrs. Justice Dobbs didn't hold back in her assessment of Elliot Turner. She described him as a man of striking arrogance, someone who felt entitled to control another person's life and take it when that control was challenged. She said, Emily was a lovely, kind, fun-loving girl who brought a ray of sunshine to those she touched. That light has been extinguished suddenly and needlessly by you. She told him directly that he didn't love Emily. She was a trophy, the judge said, and the relationship, if it could even be called that, was all about control. Control he enforced with threats and aggression. Mrs. Justice Dobbs also sentenced him to 9 months to run concurrently for perverting the course of justice, for his attempts to cover up the crime, for destroying evidence, for manipulating witnesses. But Elliot Turner wasn't the only one on trial. His parents, Anita and Lee, faced their own charges. These parents had been giving their son money for years to keep up his partying lifestyle. They'd funded his destructive behavior, enabled his worst impulses, and shielded him from any consequences. And when he committed the ultimate crime, when he took Emily's life, they loved him so much or were so desperate to protect their family name that they tried to cover up what he'd done. Lee Turner destroyed a letter in which Elliot had confessed to causing Emily's death. He literally burned evidence, threw in a fire, watched it turn to ash. Anita removed the jacket from the bedroom where the confession letter had supposedly been written, attempting to eliminate physical evidence that could be tested for fibers, DNA, or other forensic markers. Most disturbingly, she delayed calling an ambulance after finding Emily unresponsive. Those critical minutes, those moments when immediate medical intervention might have made a difference, were wasted while Elliot hid evidence and the family settled on a story to tell police. They prioritized their son's freedom over a dying girl's life. When Anita was asked during trial why she didn't call an ambulance immediately, she said she didn't believe Emily was deceased. But that explanation made no sense. If she genuinely thought Emily might be alive, that would be even more reason to call for help immediately. The delay only makes sense if she knew Emily was already gone and was buying time for the cover-up. During cross-examination, one of the prosecutors asked Anita a pointed question. Did she think Emily had ruined her son's life? There was a long 6-second pause. 6 seconds of silence in a courtroom is an eternity. You could hear people shifting in their seats. And then, finally, she said no. But that pause spoke volumes. That hesitation revealed her true feelings. Part of her did blame Emily for her son's situation. In one of the recordings played in court, one of those damning listening device recordings, Lee asked his wife if they'd done the right thing by helping Elliot cover up the crime. "We've done the right thing," Anita replied with conviction, with certainty, with absolute commitment to protecting her son regardless of the cost. Both Anita, who was 51 years old, and Lee, who was 54, were found guilty of perverting the course of justice. They were each sentenced to 27 months in prison. That's over 2 years behind bars for trying to help their son get away with taking someone's life. Mrs. Justice Linda Dobbs told them during sentencing, "You chose to fight this case, showing little remorse." She noted that they could have admitted their wrongdoing, could have shown genuine regret, could have taken accountability. Instead, they fought the charges, maintained their innocence, and showed no real remorse for their role in obstructing justice. She added that although Lee claimed he didn't know what was in the letter when he burned it, that he'd just been following instructions without understanding, his voice on the recordings made it clear that the weight of what he'd done was heavy on his conscience. He knew. He knew exactly what he was destroying and why. The Turners were released in 2013 after serving approximately half of their sentence, which is standard in the UK justice system for nonviolent offenses. And here's something that's truly disturbing. They still live in the same house where Emily Longley died. That converted garage where their son strangled a 17-year-old girl. They returned to that house after prison. They live there to this day. After the verdicts, Emily's father, Mark, broke down as he spoke to the media outside the courthouse. Standing with his ex-wife Caroline and their surviving daughter Hannah, he delivered a statement that captured the family's pain and anger. He said, "What we've heard over these 5 weeks has shocked us and disgusted us. That a man as cruel as Turner could treat a gentle, loving girl like Emily so violently is impossible to understand." He said they were incredibly proud of Emily, proud that she'd traveled halfway around the world to build a better life for herself, proud of her ambitions and her courage. And they were devastated that Turner chose to end that life, to extinguish that potential. Mark also talked about Turner's repeated threats and boasting, about how he'd openly said he would harm Emily, about how he'd calculated the prison time he'd be willing to serve. No one took him seriously until it was too late, Mark said. He explained that even Turner's own mother didn't react appropriately when Elliot texted her saying he was going to harm Emily. She received a direct threat from her son against his girlfriend and did nothing. Maybe if someone had taken him seriously, Emily might still be here today, Mark said, his voice breaking. It's a haunting thought. How many opportunities were there to intervene? How many warnings were ignored? How many people heard Elliot's threats and dismissed them as empty talk? He ended his statement by saying, "I hope Turner thinks about what he's done every single day he's in prison. It's the wish of a grieving father, hoping that somewhere inside that arrogant, entitled young man, there's a conscience that torments him." In October 2020, nearly a decade after Emily's death, the press reported that Elliot Turner had been confronted by his cellmates in prison. The incident happened after he put up photos of Emily in his cell, displaying pictures of the girl he'd taken from this world. He was also bragging about receiving letters from women who called themselves his fans. Apparently, some people are attracted to criminals, are fascinated by violent men, and Elliot was feeding off that attention just as he always had. Some of the men in prison with him turned on him when he started talking about how he'd soon be back to a life filled with champagne, luxury cars, and parties. He was counting down the days until his minimum sentence was served, planning his return to the privileged lifestyle he'd always known. For many of his fellow inmates, men who came from nothing, men who would never know that kind of wealth, his arrogance was too much to tolerate. So they delivered their own form of justice. The beating serves as a reminder that even in prison, even in that controlled environment, reputation matters. What you're in for matters. How you carry yourself matters. And bragging about taking a young woman's life while displaying her photos like trophies will earn you enemies. In about 5 years from now, around 2028 or 29, Turner will be allowed to apply for early release. He'll go before a parole board. He'll make his case for why he should be released back into society. He'll talk about rehabilitation, about remorse, about being a changed man. Many people can only hope the parole board uses good judgment, especially when it comes to someone who, even a decade into his sentence, still shows no real remorse for what he did. Someone who still saw Emily as a trophy to display rather than a human being whose life he stole. The Emily Longley case is a devastating reminder of how domestic violence escalates, how controlling behavior turns lethal, and how families can become complicit in covering up the worst crimes. It's a story about a girl who deserved so much more, who had her whole life ahead of her, whose potential was extinguished by jealousy and rage. It's also a cautionary tale about taking threats seriously. Elliot Turner told multiple people he would harm Emily. He said out loud. He texted his mother about it, and everyone dismissed it as talk, as posturing, as an empty threat from all talk Turner. But talk became action. Words became violence. And a 17-year-old girl, paid the ultimate price. If you found this case compelling, don't forget to like this video, drop a comment below sharing your thoughts on this case, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss another upload. We post true crime case videos every single night here on Final Verdict Files, bringing you the most detailed and thoroughly researched cases from around the world. Until next time, stay sharp, stay vigilant, and remember that sometimes the biggest red flags are hiding in plain sight.